Welcome to part 1 of the Building Simple Network Topologies tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to create a simple network using point-to-point and bus topologies. If you haven't completed the previous tutorials, especially the tutorial on the overview of NS3 as well as the installation tutorial, then I would advise you to stop this video and complete those tutorials first. It is essential since we are going to be doing some live NS3 programming from this point on, and in order for you to get the most out of the experience, you need to be able to follow along by typing in the code into NS3 and also executing it. That's the best way you can learn and the best way for you to get some practice. So if you haven't done that yet, just stop the video. Don't worry, I won't be upset. I'll be waiting right here whenever you get back. So what will we cover in this tutorial? Well, first of all, we're going to look at container and helper classes. These classes are essential to simplifying the process of creating simple networks. Then we're going to do some live programming where we are going to create a simple network that contains point-to-point and bus topologies. Once we've completed that, we're going to look at a system in NS3 for indexing nodes and devices. And this really is a fundamental way of helping us to identify and locate objects within a simulation. And lastly, we're going to look at interface addressing. Here we're going to look at how do we identify which IP address has been assigned to a particular network interface. So let's look at some container and helper classes. The container and helper classes that I've outlined here are typically what you would most likely use for any mid-sized to large network topology in NS3. So the container classes I've outlined here are the node container, net device container, and the IPv4 interface container. So as the name suggests, a container class actually contains something. So the node container, for instance, contains in a vector pointers to network nodes. The helper classes, on the other hand, are basically our friend. They really simplify the creation of network topologies and also help us to set attributes for different components. So for instance, the point-to-point helper would help us to create and configure point-to-point networks. Similarly, the CSMA helper does the same but for a bus topology. The Internet Stack helper helps us to create TCP/IP stacks on network nodes, and we will see how we do that a little later. And lastly, we have the IPv4 address helper, which helps us to assign IP addresses to network interfaces. So let's look at some of the documentation for these classes. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go across the internet and we're going to search for the documentation. So I'm going to type in NS3 Doxygen. I'm going to click on NS3 Doxygen documentation. I'm going to click on Doxygen NS3. And here we have the website that allows us to search for the documentation for any class in NS3. So there are two ways I can search. I can search either by typing in the name of the class in the search box, or I can click on classes. So I'm going to click on classes, and then I'm going to click on class index, and this section allows me to search by name. So I'm going to click on N because I'm looking for a node container. So I'm going to scroll along a bit and I'm going to select node container from the list. So here we have the node container class reference, and here we can see that there are several constructors that allow us to create a node container. We also have methods that allow us to add nodes to a node container. We can create nodes, and we can also get a particular node from a node container given its index. So let's take a look at the net device container. So I'm going to click over here in the left pane, And here we have the net device container class reference. So you would notice that there are several constructors for creating net device containers. We have methods to add, and we also have a method to get a particular net device given the index of the device in the container. So it's pretty much similar to the node device container, and you will notice as you go through your endeavors in NS3 that the containers are fairly similar in structure. So once you get accustomed to using one or two, you will know what to expect with the others. So now that I've shown you how to find the documentation for classes via the internet using the docsgen, what happens though if we do not have a valid internet connection? Well, let me show you how you can still find the information that you seek. We actually have to use the source code for NS3. So I'm going to log in to my virtual machine that's running CentOS 6.2. I'm going to log in as root. I'm entering the password, and in a few seconds it should log me in to CentOS 6.2. And you can see here that my installation of NS3 is in a folder called NS3. So I'm going to navigate to the source folder, and here contains all the source code for all of the classes that have been created in NS3. Now I'm looking for the CSMA helper class, which I already know is located in the CSMA module, and all the helper classes would be in the helper folder for whatever module that you're looking at. And I want to double click on the header file for CSMA helper. Alright, so in there you can see we actually have access to the source code for NS3. A little word of caution that while you're in the source code, be careful not to change anything unless you are intentionally doing so. If you can't remember what you changed, your installation will not compile properly again, and you may have a little bit of headache on your hands. So just be very careful while you're in here. So you can see here that we have a CSMA helper constructor for constructing CSMA helper objects, and we can see we have the set device attribute function as well as the set channel attribute function, which is quite similar to the point-to-point device. And of course we have several install methods or functions that help us to install CSMA net devices on nodes as well. The one we will be using more often than not is this one here, where we will pass a node container to the install method. It will install CSMA net devices on all the nodes in that container and then give us back a net device container. So you can see that it's very easy really to get documentation, and actually this method is the preferred method really, because we need to get accustomed to actually navigating the source code, especially when we have to try to understand what NS3 is doing in the background for us, and that's a very important skill to develop. So I know we like luxury, but we need to also learn how to do things old school. So I hope that you get some practice with this method of looking for the documentation, and just remember, be careful because you are dealing with the actual source code for NS3. So now that we have actually looked at some container and helper classes, and we have looked at how to find the documentation via the internet as well as using the NS3 source code, let us take a closer look again at a component in NS3 that if you had viewed the previous videos, you would have been already introduced to, and it's the NS3 node that we're talking about. Essentially, a node really equates to IP host. So it could be basically be something like a PC or a laptop. It could be like a wireless device. It could be a server, a printer. Basically, any network entity that you want to simulate in NS3, you can represent using a node. In addition to that as well, if you look at the diagram, you can see that a node would consist of several applications, and that should not surprise us. because take for instance the laptop that I'm recording this video on, it has several applications running on it as well. Right now I have Oracle VirtualBox running, I have a web browser, I have Microsoft PowerPoint, and I'm sure there are other things that are running as well. So similarly, in NS3, a node can have several applications. So we can have, for instance, here we have some built-in applications in NS3, like an on-off application, UDP trace client application. We have Echo client and Echo server applications, and packet sync. These are just some of the built-in applications available to us in NS3. Of course, if you get deeper into NS3, which I hope you do, you will have the opportunity to create some custom applications for yourself. And you can obviously install those on any node of your pleasing. Another thing I like to look at is what is represented here. It's called an internet stack, and as you can see, there's some protocols listed here like TCP, UDP, IPv4 and IPv6, ICMP app, as well as some sockets. Don't know how well you're acquainted with such protocols, but if you have a networking background, these protocols and entities should not be something that is new to you. So just like any machine or any PC, there's a TCP IP protocol stack that's installed on the machine, and we have to do the same thing here. We install basically a TCP IP stack on every node that is in the simulation. Also, you would notice here that there are several net devices, and again, a net device is basically what we would call a network interface card. And we know that your network interface card and your PC or laptop has a unique MAC address, and it has an IP interface that has an IP address, or it could have several IP addresses on it, as a matter of fact. And we can see, of course, that we have multiple network interface cards that could be installed on your node, just as it would be on a regular PC. We also can see here that there are several net devices that are available to us in NS3. We have the point-to-point net device, the CSMA net device. We have the loopback, which we will talk about briefly a little later on. And then if you get into some wireless programming later on, we'll see the LTE and WiMAX net devices that we will need to use for those types of networks. So before we actually get into some live programming, I'd just like to look at the task or objectives that we would like to cover as we create our networks in NS3. First of all, we would want to create the network nodes, which is kind of obvious because that's the starting point. And then we could install an internet stack on each node, after which we could attach one or more net devices to each node, and then attach the device itself to the point-to-point channel. Once we completed that, we can then create a network interface for each network device, and then we could assign an IP address to the network interface. So those are the basic steps that we're going to follow, and I would like you to pay attention and look out for those steps as I go through the live programming session in a little bit. Well, if I haven't bored you by now, or if you're not sleeping, or if you wish to take a break, this might be a good time to pause the video, probably get some tea and biscuits or something, and when you get back, you will be good and ready to go to start some live NS3 programming.